Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Before we begin, I'm just going to pause for a few minutes while we wait for more people to connect. We'll then go over some housekeeping regarding the GoToWebinar platform. We still have people joining us. Thank you for joining us and being nice and early. We're just going to give it a few seconds just while we wait for everyone to connect. We'll go through some of the GoToWebinar controls and get started. Okay, for those of you who aren't familiar with using GoToWebinar, we've got a little screenshot on the screen to give you a rundown. During the webinar, you'll be able to add questions for our speaker via the drop down in the control panel that says questions as indicated on the screen. Please post questions at any time and we'll be having time for discussion at the end of the webinar. Your mics and cameras will remain off for the session. The webinar will be recorded and a copy will be made available. ARACI hosts webinars to share information and promote discussion across a range of topics. We welcome the opportunity to highlight research and centre the voices of those with lived experience. Through these webinars, we seek to grow capability and knowledge across the sector. I'd now like to welcome Rebecca Goodhue, ARACI Lead for Capacity Building, who's going to be presenting today's webinar.
Thanks, Liz. I will share my screen. We live and work on lands whose sovereignty was never ceded, and acknowledge the deep connection that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have to community and country throughout Australia. We pay our respects to elders, past, present, and those yet to be. Welcome all. I'm really happy to be talking to you about the common approach today. And get my slides going. We're going to start with talking about the word wellbeing. Wellbeing is currently used ambiguously. It's often used to mean mental health. In the education sector, it's often used interchangeably with social emotional learning. And we at ARACI, and indeed many of our partners and hundreds of our collaborators, mean wellbeing to be a holistic and umbrella concept where mental health, social emotional learning, and many other elements sit underneath. The other conceptualization of well-being, the other aspects of the concept of well-being include that it's a dynamic state in that it follows the natural ebbs and flows of people's lives. It's both subjective and objective in the way it's both about how a child or a young person thinks of and feels about their life and about the objective measurable conditions. It's about thriving, not just surviving. Wellbeing is a major contributor. It's not one and the same as quality of life. And for a young person, wellbeing is much more closely linked to their family's wellbeing as opposed to an adult. And it's multifaceted or multidimensional. And what we know is that we've got extremely established dimensions or domains of wellbeing, and these come from the NEST. The NEST is Australia's wellbeing framework for children and young people. It's been around for over 10 years now, and we use a continual cycle of improvement to ensure that it reflects the voices of children and young people today. It took 2 years to develop, and we are talking about an actual NEST. I'm pleased to say it is not an acronym. We drown in a world of acronyms, so hence the branch. The name came from one of the young people that was involved in the process, and at the end of the 2 years, they stood up and said, It's like if each of these areas are considered and supported, then we can be happy and healthy and fly from the nest. Aracy developed the nest in conjunction with 150 partner organisations, and it involved 4,000 or over 4,000 voices of children, young people, experts, researchers, policymakers. Now, what are these 6 areas of the nest? In no particular order, they are material basics. And that's what you would imagine in terms of safe, secure housing, transport, enough food, nutritional food, enough money for necessities, but also things like spending regular time in nature. Feeling valued by your teachers, feeling loved by your family, being safe at home, at school, in the neighbourhood, and online. Healthy encompasses physical health, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, sexual health. Having a positive sense of identity and culture, and that's important regardless of your ethnicity or background. Learning refers to any and all time learning. So that's not just learning within a formal institutionalized sense. This is where family engagement in learning comes in, learning at the home and in the community as well. And participating. Participating involves ensuring that that child or that young person has a genuine voice in decisions that impact them, as well as being part of clubs, teams, society in general. So you could see how when the nest was being built then, it wasn't in nice, neat sections. Each section impacts on the other. So that's representing that each wellbeing domain has deep interconnectivity to all the others. And what this means is if we are not supporting one aspect of wellbeing, it's not just that section of the nest that might have a weak spot or a hole. That's going to impact on the whole structure and the whole integrity of the nest. And other weak spots are going to be appearing if only one area is not being considered and supported. But if we consider and support all 6 wellbeing areas, then our chicks can be happy and healthy and fly from the nest. So this is the nest, the wellbeing framework. One way that the wellbeing framework can be translated on the ground is through the common approach. The definition's on your screen here, but essentially the common approach is best practice to having wellbeing conversations with children, young people, and their families. It's a way for us, when I say us, people who are working directly with children and young people, to ensure that they have a more consistent, a more positive, and a more empowering experience. And consistency is a key concept here, because it shouldn't be just the school psych or the wellbeing officer or the psychologist or the person with well-being in their title or their position description that has these conversations with children and young people. It's not working and it's never going to work. We need to have anyone and everyone who has regular interaction with children and young people to be able to have these quality conversations about well-being, so that there is at least one adult in that young person's life who is having a full and rich picture about what's going on for that young person and their family. And so within a school setting, it would look like not just the wellbeing team using the common approach, but sporting coaches and front desk administrators. Really, at the end of the day, we're just talking about a conversation. And we're leveraging if you have an ongoing relationship with a child or young person, we're leveraging that relationship to be able to have these quality conversations, so that supports can get in place earlier than what is currently happening. The common approach is made up of 4 practices. You can see here that they are holistic, child-centered, working in partnership, and being strengths-based. So you're using the common approach if you're using all 4 practices at once, not 1, 2, or 3, but all 4 consistently. What the common approach does is shift that focus from that tertiary crisis space into more of that prevention and early support and engagement focus. And we're deliberately not using early intervention here. That is an outdated phrase and has negative connotations. So early support or early engagement is what we talk about. And the reason it's doing that is because we're having these conversations regularly and we're understanding what's going on for that young person in a way that we can pull in those supports quicker and earlier than if the common approach wasn't being used. It provides a shared language, so it cuts through those acronyms, the jargon, the technical language, the exclusive language that we use far too often that disempowers the children, the young people and families. And it also provides a shared understanding. What is wellbeing? Like I've outlined, there is misunderstanding and people aren't on the same page when we use that term. So we are providing a shared understanding about what is wellbeing as a concept, what do young people need to thrive. It's universal in the way that it's not just for children who have a diagnosis, who are the naughty kid in the class, who, families who are experiencing difficulty. And because of that, it's non-stigmatizing. They're not getting common approached because of XYZ. So unpacking those 4 practices, that is what makes up the approach, is child-centered. And this is the same concept as student-centered, client-centered, patient-centered. We just use child-centered within the common approach world. And it's interesting, we've been training people in the common approach for almost 10 years now, and most people would say, I work in a child-centered way. And when we ask, how do you do that? The most often response is, well, I put children at the center. I put the child at the center. What does that mean? What does that look like? What phrases do you use? What behavior do you demonstrate? What resources do you use? And so my background is a speech and language pathologist, and I practiced for 15 years. And at about year 12 of practice, I found the common approach. And I can say I was genuinely surprised at how much it changed my practice. We're never trained or provided explicit training around what does child-centered actually mean, and found it hugely valuable and beneficial. So if we stick on the child-centered for a little bit longer, an element of being child-centered is to ensure that that child has information that is relevant to them in that moment of time and that is delivered to them in a way that is meaningful. And there's various other elements that make up child-centered practice. Strengths-based, so what is working well? How can these areas of strength help the areas of need, as well as creating more opportunities for positive experiences? We now know the huge impact that positive experiences can have for children and young people, especially for those who have experienced adverse experiences. Holistic, so this is how the common approach and the nest speak to each other. So the holistic practice of the common approach refers to those nest domains that we've just gone through. And it's including those areas that you may not be trained in. So this is what I was referring to earlier with having sporting coaches or front desk administrators using the common approach, or indeed teachers. They might be very comfortable talking about learning and being valued, loved and safe, and a few of those other domains, but maybe not material basics, for example. And the reason we are providing permission for people to discuss all areas of wellbeing is because we're not expecting people to be then addressing or resolving what is coming out of these common approach conversations, unless of course that is your role and you are trained to do so. What it is about is having these holistic conversations that potential issues or emerging issues can be unearthed again, so things can be put in place, supports can be put in place earlier. The last practice is working in partnership. And so that's speaking to coming in with a power with, not power over mindset, recognizing the expertise that children and families bring, as well as working collaboratively with anyone else who's involved in that child's life. So that's the team around the child concept. And working collaboratively means having regular, meaningful communication with anyone else who's involved in the child's life. We know that if you're using all 4 practices of the Common Approach, aka using the Common Approach, then more positive, trusting and responsive relationships will exist. And responsive relationships is one of the key elements of building brains. And there's not many more important endeavors than building brains. What the Common Approach is not. It's not a tool. It's not a tool because a tool implies that you are making a judgment on that young person or the family, and you're looking in your toolbox for what you deem to be most relevant. And so that speaks to the universality. It doesn't matter what you already know of that child or what you think is happening. We need to be being child-centered, strengths-based, holistic and collaborative with every child that we interact with. It's not a risk assessment. It's not an assessment of any type. You don't get scores. It's not diagnosis. It's not diagnosed. You don't get a diagnosis from it. It's not criterion-based or standardized in any way. It's not appropriate for crisis situations, and I hope that's obvious in the way that you need to focus on whatever that crisis is and go about resolving that. We do know that using the Common Approach reduces the likelihood of further crises from happening. And it's not effective for one-off interactions in the way that you probably wouldn't be having a Common Approach conversation in an accident and emergency context. You can use it, it's just not effective in those one-off situations. And that's because you need this ongoing relationship. You need to have regular interaction for the Common Approach to be effective. We have excellent evidence to show that the Common Approach does what it's designed to do. So we've had it independently evaluated by the Social Policy Research Centre, as well as multiple internal evaluations. And it shows that the Common Approach improves relationships with families. It increases the ability to identify strengths and needs, more quickly gets to the root cause of behaviour, increases awareness of the practitioner's role in prevention, improves collaboration, and that's with the child and the family as well as anyone else who is working with that child or family, and it makes jobs easier. So the explanation around that is, yes, you need to dedicate time to training, and I'll speak about the training shortly, and the embedding of the Common Approach. But for a long-term view, because the focus is more on early engagement, early support, and having that fuller and more holistic picture of that child's well-being, in the long term, it does make your job easier. The next steps are a really important part of the Common Approach. So in some of the conversations, you will be identifying next steps. Not every Common Approach conversation is likely to come out with next steps, depending on the situation, because you can have a Common Approach conversation walking from one classroom to the other or sitting on the side of a sporting field. It doesn't need to be a sitting at a desk situation with resources in front of you. But some of these conversations will have next steps identified. And if we go to the other end of this diagram now for formal targeted referrals, obviously in your conversations, if you've seen the need for an OT or a allied health practitioner referral or whatever that referral may be, you need to do that. But within the Common Approach world, we have the emphasis on action that the child or the family can take themselves. And this can be a realistic something that can be implemented tomorrow that uses their strengths to help their areas of need. And so this could be something like introduce a screen-free night every week, start having dinner around the table, a board game night, something that can help improve their well-being, and ideally that they have suggested themselves. And this is where the empowerment comes most at the fore for the common approach, is that if you are using the common approach correctly, you're having very equalized conversations about what's going on for that child or that young person, and making suggestions that then might help them come up with their own next steps. It's not coming in saying, this is what we need to do to help improve your well-being. I'm hoping you can start to see the benefits of the common approach by now. For people who are using the common approach, it improves relationships. It provides that support structure for ensuring that best practices are implemented. Something I've been having conversations with various partners and people who are exploring doing the training or are using the common approach is the fact that it provides that link between best practice or practice guidelines and the everyday practice that happens in reality. It's all well and good to have the guidelines. How do we ensure that those guidelines are translated to what you do every day? The common approach is one way of doing that. For children and families, it is providing that consistency, it's providing more an empowering way, and there's early identification of their strengths and needs. For the child and youth sector, there's that more prevention approach, there's more collaboration, there's that consistency again. And for government and society, it does help in breaking down those silos across the departments and sectors and professions, because you're using the same language, you're using a common approach. It increases the overall well-being of the young population, and long term, because of the focus on prevention and early engagement and support, there would be financial savings also. So the common approach comes with a whole suite of resources. The wellbeing wheel that you can see in front of you now is the foundation of those resources. You can see that it's an ecological approach. We've got the child in the centre within themselves, the child within the family context in that middle ring, and the child within the community environment in that outer ring. And you'll recognise those 6 areas, the wellbeing domains, on the outside of that wheel. The text within each segment are starting points, they're prompts, some of them can be high-level indicators. They're to give an idea about what sits inside each of those domains. So that wellbeing wheel is then translated onto resources like posters. There's wellbeing wheel worksheets where you can circle strengths, you can underline needs, you can write next steps, you can scribble all over it. There's question booklets for young people themselves, for parents and carers. There are reference resources, so they are reminders for you as the common approach user. What do I need to be doing to be child-centred, strengths-based, holistic and collaborative, and example or starting points for questions. Remembering that this is not an interview, this is not an assessment. So although we've provided the text within each of those domains, and in some of the resources there are questions to ask, it is a dialogue. And I think that sometimes we forget that if we are going to have a conversation, it needs to go both ways. It needs to be a dialogue. So what that means for common approach users is that we need to be comfortable with what we're going to share with a young person or a family about our own lives. Something I often do is say things like, I took my dog to the river for a walk on the weekend. What did you get up to? And so I start with something that I'm comfortable sharing, and it allows that opportunity for the young person to say, I did ABC, whatever I did, and start a genuine conversation so that you are not going in there with that mindset of a checklist or an assessment or something that needs to be captured and measured. So what does the training involve? It is now a blended learning course. That course involves 3 to 3.5 hours of self-paced e-learning modules. So they are, there's podcasts, there's interactive activities. You can see a screenshot of one of the activities on the slides now. There's a video of an example conversation and some reading. It is audio supported as well. Once you've done those e-learning modules, then you can book yourself in for the 90-minute virtual workshop, and they're run regularly across different days and times, and you can just book yourself in for what works for your calendar. The Common Approach is accredited depending on what jurisdiction you're in and what sector you're in, but for example here in the ACT, the Common Approach is accredited with the Teacher Quality Institute, so for all the educators out there, that counts for your PD. It is priced at $3.95 per person. There's group discounts available for 20 people or more, and that's a sliding discount scale. So the more you have, the more the price point will go down. And there is the, if you're wanting to jump in already, which by all means please do, there is the e-learning address there. That's where you register for yourself to do the training. So I'm now going to pass back to Liz to start the questions and discussion. The address that was on there, I think you're going to put in the chat, thank you Liz, is also where to register for the Eraseed newsletter. And we provide that weekly, and that's free and jam-packed full of resources and information around children and young people, as well as opportunities webinar-wise and other professional development opportunities. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rebecca. You've stole a little bit of my thunder there with sharing some of our links, that I'll be popping them in the chat in a bit. We do have some questions that have come through, but I'd just like to start with one, because you mentioned that you've been training people in the Common Approach for over 10 years now. That's a pretty impressive milestone. So I'm just wondering if you can tell us where the Common Approach is currently being implemented.
Yeah, sure. So it is being implemented throughout Australia. We're in every state and territory, and there are pockets of more widespread use. At the moment, the most current one is in southwest Sydney. We're training 2,000 practitioners under the investment approach for social impact strategy, which is a cross government initiative within southwest Sydney. And so we've got, I think we're up to about 1,600 out of the 2,000 people who are doing the training there. And that's across any sector. So we've got people from education, health, community services, housing, and what we'll be doing the end of this year and next year is establishing a Common Approach community of practice within that region. So it again increases the likelihood and the chances of it not just becoming a training that is done and then forgotten. It means that the actual 4 practices are going to be embedded and much more likely to be discussed, and success stories shared and peer learning happening through that community of practice. We've also got people using the Common Approach in Finland. So in 2020, Finland government did a global search on this type of way of working and a common approach. And they landed on our Common Approach. So we trained up a group of people in Helsinki who are now training practitioners throughout the city of Helsinki to use the Common Approach, which is pretty exciting considering they're Finland and they are leaders in many ways. Thanks, Liz.
Excellent. That is very exciting. So international. All right, questions are coming in thick and fast. So I've got the first question here, which I think is a great one. Is the Common Approach designed to be used with any age groups?
Yes, it is. In terms of the resource kits, we have resources specifically for sort of 8 and up, and it is on our list to create resources for that younger cohort. But in saying that, you can use the common approach without using any of the resources. If you are using those 4 practices, then you are using the common approach. And it does tend to be that the younger the child, the more often we are having conversations with the parents or carers. But in saying that, I'll provide a couple of examples of how people are using it in that younger age. So we've got a few early education centres around the country who are using the common approach more at a centre or place-based level rather than an individual level. They are having common approach conversations individually, but what they're doing is when they're having the getting to know you sort of open day where you come in and meet the staff and walk around the centre and see what it's like and if that's what you would like to send your child to. And when they're having these days, they are having 6 stations that are set up that represent each of those 6 wellbeing domains. So for material basics, it's a doll's house, or positive sense of identity and culture, they have had music, like a little music space, valued, loved and safe, a beanbag area, learning, library sort of space. You get the idea. And as the families walk around, one of the staff members talk about those 6 domains and explain what it is and what that means. And so all together, that is creating that concept, that holistic concept of well-being. So before they've even started going to that centre, they've got an understanding about well-being literacy, and then can have much easier conversations with the parents around well-being and having common approach conversations with that intro.
Excellent. Would you consider the common approach a framework, is a question we've been asked.
No, great question. The nest is the framework. The nest is the well-being framework. The common approach is a methodology. It's a way of working. It's, I guess, if you had to call it a framework, you'd say a practice framework, but we do try and separate the nest as a wellbeing framework and the common approach as an approach.
We've got a question about the research papers and the references here. So people are wondering if they can have access to it. I'm going to pop the link to our website in the chat so that people can download it themselves. But would you mind just giving us a little bit of a overview?
Yeah, no worries. So we have an common approach evidence document, which is pretty lengthy. So we've created a evidence summary. They're both available on our website. And if you've got any other questions around that, the evidence base, then please email us at commonapproach@eracy.org.au. I will just say that in terms of how the evidence is structured and communicated, the 4 practices separately sit on their own evidence base. And so there's that piece of evidence. Then there's evidence for the common approach as an approach, so that package of the 4 practices. And that is the independent evaluation, the formative evaluation, our own evaluations. There's also evaluations that have looked at specific cohorts. So there's a consultation that happened that explored the common approach for culturally and linguistically diverse families and refugee families. And so if I take that as an example, the outcomes of that specific evaluation was that, yes, it is appropriate and relevant for those families and those populations. It, because of the customizable factor, the flexibility, it absolutely works. And another outcome was around how the resources didn't need to be translated into numerous languages, because it would be more up to the translator or the cultural worker or community worker to do that translation rather than the resources itself needing to be translated. But there was a new resource that came out of that consultation in terms of being a more simple, it's called the Simplified Wellbeing Wheel, and it just has less text. And the one that you can see behind me, it only has the child, family, community, and then the 6 areas around the outside. It doesn't have all the inner text. So yes, there's lots to read and learn around the evaluation and evidence.
That's great. So you did just touch on cold communities, but we've got a question specifically about Middle Eastern communities. Are you aware of any use within Middle Eastern communities?
I'm not personally, but I'm sure we've got, out of the thousands and thousands of people using the common approach around the country, it would be used with those families. And I'm off the top of my head pretty sure that those families were involved in that specific evaluation I just outlined.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a question here. How is the common approach different to the UK family partnership model? Are you familiar with the UK family partnership model, Bex?
Yes, I am. So as you'll hopefully remember, one of the 4 practices of the common approach is working in partnership. So the evidence base and the literature and the content around that practice of the common approach is pulled predominantly from the family partnership model in the UK. So Davis and Day are the key people within that and created it, and we have informed that part of the common approach based on that evidence base. So I guess you could say that it's 1/4. How is it different? Well, it's 1/4 of the common approach is based on the family partnership model. The other difference is that it sits at a higher level. So family partnership training is much more in depth. It's longer. It's goes to a deeper level to what the common approach is designed to do. We want to provide anyone accessible training to understand these 4 practices and to be able to use them in their work. We don't get to the level that family partnership model training does.
We've got a question. Is it exclusively for practitioners or can parents enrol?
Yes, I love this question. We are in the process of creating a common approach for parents and carers. We're going to be not calling it the common approach. It's going to be called wellbeing literacy, and that will be freely available. Timing wise, I think it'll be the start of next year that'll be launched, and that'll be a max of half-hour type module. That'll be a self-paced online e-learning module, and that'll cover the nest and the 4 practices of the common approach, and also with an emphasis on not just as a parent or a carer using these 4 practices and understanding that holistic concept of well-being, but also advocating for anyone else who is working with your child to be using these 4 practices.
Following on from that, we've got a question, can or how does the common approach work in high school communities?
Yes, it definitely does. Various ways. So a few examples is the resource, the question booklet for young people that I touched on the resource slide. It covers those 6 areas of well-being in a very informal way, and it's a sliding scale to answer. And it's been used in certain high schools in a PE health type lesson where the whole class completes that question booklet, and then the teacher collects those question booklets, and based on those answers then tailors the next term or section of work based on that cohort's answers, with always that understanding that if they are completing something like that, then they can have a common approach conversation with a teacher or anyone else that they trust within that school environment. Otherwise, it's being used is, like I mentioned earlier, with every single adult doing the training within a high school setting, so that it doesn't matter who that child has that positive and trusting relationship with, that adult is going to be able to have a quality wellbeing conversation with that young person. I guess the most common way it's being used in a high school setting is that it is just the wellbeing team or certain selected people, staff members from the school doing the training and using it. But as I've outlined, we really suggest that it is much more universal and absolutely anyone within a high school setting could be using it.
So we've got a question here which aligns quite closely. So they're saying, whilst it's not a formal assessment tool, can it be used to capture the strengths and needs of a family for referrals to another support service, such as a transition plan from primary to secondary school?
Yeah, absolutely. It is and can do that. It's really flexible. As long as you're using those 4 practices, you're using the common approach. So it can be used to do something like that, and there's certain resources that can have a visual of that in terms of the capturing the strengths, the needs, the next steps. What I was going to say most, but many of our organisations who are adopting the common approach do is use the common approach and then in parallel use their own assessment tool to report to funders or their reporting to address their reporting requirements. The common approach is deliberately designed to not capture measurement progress in a quantitative way. It's not about scoring. It's not showing progress from a 4 or a 5 or a scale in that regard. In saying that, in a qualitative way, it is quite easy to show progress. And certain teams and organisations have used the question booklets to show that. So at the start of the year or start of the term or whatever it is, they would do that, complete the question booklet, and then compare it X number of weeks or months later and see the progress in that way. But it's really up to who is adopting the common approach to make it work for what they need within that context. What we ask is that it's not adapted to a way that within the common approach conversation, you are then having a checklist or writing scores down in any way. That would then eat into the integrity of the conversation and the common approach.
So you were just talking then about the resource booklets and the questionnaires. So we've had someone ask, how can we access these resources?
Yes, by doing the training. So the resources that are freely available now are the Common Approach brochure and the wellbeing wheel that I showed on the slide. But there's a whole suite of resources that you get when you enroll in the training. And the reason we don't provide the resources without the training is because what we've found is that a lot of people see these resources and think, great, fantastic, that's exactly what I was after, I'm going to use it without doing the training. And the common approach is not the resources. The common approach are the 4 practices of being child-centered, strengths-based, holistic, and collaborative. The resources are there to support you to use those practices consistently. And we've found that if people receive the resources without doing the training, they don't use them in a holistic way or a child-centered way or a collaborative way. We've had people use the resource, use the question booklet and photocopy just the positive sense of identity and culture page and use it for an activity. That goes against exactly what we've been talking about in terms of ensuring that when you're having these conversations, we want to be holistic and considering all aspects of it, not just focusing on one. If we focus on one, we're entrenching that siloed way of working and that siloed way of thinking yet again.
We're talking again about examples of the common approach in practice, and someone's just asked if you're aware of any examples where educators and parents are learning about the common approach together.
Not that I'm aware of. The closest I can think of is a project that we've got going in Taree at the moment in New South Wales, where there's a common approach community of practice in Taree, and it's being used in most of the schools there and a lot of the community service provider organisations and some of the health providers. And within the school setting, there has been a pilot of providing common approach training to the children themselves, so upper high school level ages, and ensuring that the parents of those children are communicated to around that information. So that's the closest we've come to in terms of them together learning.
We've got a question about that relates to therapy, and do you think the common approach aligns with single session therapy? So this question was posted when you spoke about how it's generally not for a one-off.
Yeah. So the caveat there is even if you as a person are only seeing that child or that family once, you can use the common approach. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not going to be as effective because you're not going to see them again. But if someone within your team or your organization is going to see them, then absolutely that's the caveat around that, because they're still having that consistent language and that consistent approach and seeing the same resources. So yeah, the single session therapy, it can be used within. It's just going to be much more effective if you're going to see them more than once.
You're going to love this question. I love this question because I know it's something that we'd love as a RACI, but is there work being done to have such an approach embedded in practice within specific sectors so we're all using the same approach and language?
I mean, that's the overall objective. That is the world domination plan and view and hope. And it is slowly happening. It's you know, I've been at a RACI for over 9 years, and the change that I've seen within the common approach use is phenomenal. And I think it's exponentially going in the right direction now. People are really seeing the value and the need for something like this, for this consistent approach and this consistent, the shared language and the shared understanding. It's all based on funding in terms of what we are able to do, and it is, you know, in terms of the price point for the training at an individual level, that's on a cost recovery basis. RACI is a not-for-profit NGO, so we just use a cost recovery model. Then we have either philanthropic or government sources to fund specific projects. So that's what would be after, to do a focus on a specific sector. The current one now that might be relevant to this question is that we do have a grant through the Commonwealth Federal Department of Health, and some of that funding is going towards exploring accreditation within the health sector for the common approach, which is a huge task in itself, but we are making inroads to that.
Yep, thank you for that question. It is definitely something that we'd love to have happen, isn't it? So we've had someone, it's a bit of a comment and question. You've outlined the example of the question book being provided to an entire class. So there's a great example of a non-stigmatizing approach. Are there any other examples of like population level activities, how it can be delivered?
So there was also the other example I talked about in an early education centre with the stations, the wellbeing stations. Other group or population level examples. Yes, there's certain places around the country who are using the common approach, and they use the common approach at a interagency format to talk about what work they're doing. The common approach has also been used in a supervision structure way, so it's less at a population or group level, but in another way that it can be used. Yeah, that's what I'll say for that one.
So we've got a question here. Would the common approach be complementary to the brain story research that's coming out of the Alberta Family Wellness Centre?
Yes, I love that question. Absolutely aligned, very much so. We are big fans of the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative, and in fact, RACI and Thriving Queensland Kids, who are RACI auspices, are involved in creating brain building modules or understanding brain development modules. That is currently live. We're doing our formal launch next week, so you're getting insider knowledge here that there are Understanding Brain Development is the title of the course. It's through the Emerging Minds website, and it is based or informed by the Alberta Wellness Family work and through the Harvard Centre for Developing Child work. but for an Australian context and audience. And if you are able to, and that's freely available if you're not familiar with the Emerging Minds work, that is free of charge. It's about a 4 to 5 hour course, and within that course you will see reference to both the NEST and the Common Approach. So deeply aligned.
Great. I've just popped the link to register for the Eracy newsletter in the chat, because when we launch that, we'll be sharing that information there. All right. Would you say that the Common Approach is suitable for group facilitation as a way of working with families to discuss family wellbeing?
It is, but with the understanding that they would then need opportunities to have one-on-one conversations as well. It couldn't only be at a group level. It'd be a very appropriate way of working for a group, as long as they then can have a chance to have a more personal and private conversation as well.
Excellent. So thinking about the possibility of using the Common Approach, specifically the question booklet for young students with hearing loss, are they typically self-reporting, or do you go through it with an adult? Will this depend on the child's communication and literacy level?
Yeah, it's absolutely dependent, and again, you make it work to what you need to. You use your own professional judgment to what's going to be best and appropriate for that child and that context. They have been used in various ways, both as at a self-reporting level, and in fact, we've got one organisation in Adelaide who provide the question booklets to both the young people and the parents at their first meeting, and say, you go home and do these separately and come back and we'll talk about it. And they've got over a 90% return rate, which I think is incredible, because basically you're giving them homework to do. But what the feedback is that if you're self-reporting and you have the ability to do that, and then come back and have that conversation, that discussion to compare answers, well, not answers, but responses with the parent versus the young person, and have someone moderate and facilitate that conversation, hugely valuable, really highlighting the difference of perspectives and where they are on the same page, and allows a really beautiful basis for discussion. In terms of a specific child with hearing impairment, that would be completely up to you how that can work. With the question booklet, there's no barrier to access that if you've got hearing impairment, but you can do it side by side as well, and just as you don't even need to fill it out if you don't want to. It's really, they are just there to be used in a way that's going to be most productive and effective for that young person or family.
So we've got here, is the training most relevant for practitioners that work directly with families, or can it help collaborate between service providers?
Yes, and actually I'm really glad someone asked that question, because it was remiss of me not to say that predominantly the people who do the training are the people who work directly with children, young people and families. However, we really encourage and suggest that at least a portion of the team leaders, the supervisors, the managers, those who are managing teams of practitioners, do the training as well. It's going to help them understand what it is about, as well as increase the chances of it getting embedded into that organisation or team. We've had researchers do the training, policy makers, decision makers in government. It is not limited to just those people who are working directly. There'll be certain areas of the training that are more relevant than others if you're in a non-direct position.
We've got another question about the resources, but specifically about resources for practitioners working with First Nations young people and families. Do you have supporting resources for those practitioners?
We do, and we are looking at doing a specific evaluation for First Nations communities with the Common Approach, we just need to find the funding to do so. In saying that, we are constantly gathering feedback from practitioners working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, and seeing the data that says, yes, this is an appropriate way of working. I have done a interview actually with an Aboriginal elder who was a social worker in Mount Gambier, and she was using the Common Approach, as was all her team. And what she was saying in the interview is that it's absolutely an appropriate way of yarning, and it's just about modifying the questions. So within the resources there I mentioned earlier, there are some that provide example questions or starting questions, and she provided some of her own that would, those are the type of things we'd love to make into a specific resource. But again, because it's so flexible, it's up to you. The simplified wellbeing wheel that I was speaking about earlier, that came out from the culturally and linguistically diverse specific evaluation, is used often, and that's what actually this social worker Aboriginal elder was saying, is that's the one she uses most often too. In saying that, I have mentioned before, but to emphasize that the resources are just there to help you support the use of these 4 practices. You don't need to use any if you don't want to.
Thank you for clarifying. We're getting close to the end now, so we've just got we've got a lot of questions here, and we'll just get through just a few more. We've got a question: can the question booklet being used as a source of data collection from children?
Depends what you mean by data. So yes, qualitatively, you absolutely can. If you're looking for a score and more quant data, then no. What we've had teams and organisations do is, in parallel to the Common Approach, create their own or use whatever they had existing data collection tool. Because remembering that the Common Approach is this way of working, it's the way that you have these conversations. It's not about collecting data to then report on or measure. So yes and no is the answer to that question.
That's great. So our last question I'm going to wrap up with now is, do you know of any child assessments that have been developed based on the NEST domains?
No, is the short answer. We as a RACI have explored that really deeply for over many years, but because of relating back to that previous question, because we understand that a lot of people who are working with children and families need to collect data, and they need to report on progress and measure. However, it's not what it's designed to do. We support other people to use whatever they need to use, as long as it's in alignment with those 4 practices and the 6 wellbeing domains. And we're also happy to review any, if you are creating it to be specifically in alignment with the Common Approach. There are organisations who have done that, and very successfully, but none that I can point to that are in the public domain.
Well, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you, Rebecca, and thanks everyone for joining us. To find out more about the Common Approach, you can visit the RACI website, and I've put the link to the website in the chat, or feel free to email the Common Approach team via email. I'll put the email address in the chat as well. You can find out more about the Common Approach and our other resources via our weekly newsletter. If you're not subscribed already, please subscribe. I've just put the chat, which is araci.org.au/register, and you will get the link for the recording for this session there, as well as lots of other current events and news. Thank you very much. We're going to bring this session to a close, and thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.